Thank you, Mr. Chair. I tell you, my good friend, Mr. Roback, but I'm going to, resist because it is important that we focus on what is important for the United States of America. It is important that we make sure that we preserve our democracy, and it is important that we make sure that we hold up the institutions of the United States of America. And I think what I have heard from just about every witness and at every corner, one of the things that Mr. Putin wants to do and wants to accomplish is to undermine institutions and to undermine and get involved with the destruction of democratic states. And when I hear it not just from, and I'm hearing this from countries from around the world, and I thank the former president for being here, because it is tremendously important when you hear from our allies in that regard. And that's why, when I look at threats to our democracy, I think it is important that we have a 9/11 style commission set up. That's why we had 9/11 in the first place. It was a threat to our democracy. So we had an independent commission so that we could make sure that does not happen. So the markup of the Sowell and Cummings Protect Our Democracy Act is tremendously important for all of us, because that's what's at stake. That's what they're trying to get at. And and I also want to join with the ranking member when he says we need a markup on the Ingle-Connolly Secure Our Democracy Act. That's tremendously important. And I thank the chair. He's indicated that we would have some hearings on Russia, and he kept his word. And we know that there'll be more and with the witnesses, so I want to thank the chair for doing that. And I agree with his and Mr. Ingle's opening statements. I'm concerned, maybe I'll ask Ambassador Baer, because what I'm concerned about, as I say, is Mr. Putin getting his way, because what I'm unfortunately hearing, somewhat similar to Mr. Robacher, actually, from Mr. Bannon in the White House, who calls for the deconstruction of the administrative state, that, that as opposed for us working to forge our values and based in our alliances and protecting and supporting those who fight for liberty, equality, and justice in the world, it seems that the Kremlin wants us to retreat from the world, and he wants our values to be diluted. But with the President Trump's repeated moral equivalences, and I think that that's what Mr. Robacher was talking about, that we are just as bad as Russia, et cetera, those are those moral equivalences that unfortunately, I'm hearing from the President of the United States, and when there's attacks on our free press, and when there's out-and-out lying going on, when there's ongoing conflicts of interest, when we have the kind of dialogue like we just heard, doesn't that already put Mr. Putin where he wants to be? And isn't that then giving him, and the administration even giving him what he wants to undermine us? Mr. Ambassador?
Thank you. I think here it's important to remember what Ambassador Bloomfield said, which is that absolutely, when we allow ourselves to be divided on a partisan basis, or allow our politics to take as fuel Russian propaganda rather than the problems of the American people, we are doing Vladimir Putin's work for him. Congressman Rohrabacher knows that I enjoy a good debate with him, and we've had the pleasure several times. And I think the important thing about what Congressman Rohrabacher said, he's right, that there is no longer an ideological drive that drives Moscow to try to undermine democracies around the world. But there is a deep insecurity that drives Moscow to try to undermine democracies around the world. Vladimir Putin's greatest fear is a democratic, successful, prosperous Ukraine. That is why he's invading Ukraine and trying to undermine the Ukrainian people's choice to live in a European-style democracy. He is threatened by democracy's success, and therefore every time that we make democracy succeed, we are countering Vladimir Putin's aims and objectives.
I only have 5 seconds, so I yield back.
We'll go to Mr. Steve Shabbat of Ohio. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, I would just note